I don't want to say Mark Ronson ruined this album because that kind of implies that he did something horrifically wrong. He didn't ruin it inherently by being in charge of the production on a Queens of the Stone Age record. And I think that's reasonable to say considering Mr. Ronson has produced a Black Lips record that was still very raw and crunchy and maintained the very heavy rock and punk ethos. I don't see why he couldn't pull off this Queens of the Stone Age album pretty well. And it makes sense that Ronson would step behind production for this album because there are many danceable tracks here that the Queens decide to kind of shoot for. Plenty of catchy grooves. In fact, one of my favourites on here is in the opening track, which does take a bit of a while to build up to, but I think that build up is very worth it because once it kicks in to that opening lick, the bass line is it's sexy. I remember hearing that song in the preview for this album and I was just so excited to hear the album for that track alone because it was just an amazing riff. And continuously on this album they do offer up some many pleasing, awesomely written, catchy guitar lines and melodies. Like on The Evil Has Landed, I do like the opening. And even if the track Fortress is probably the poppiest song on here, I do think it's quite an underrated track to bring up among the track list for this album. I think the melody just sounds so sweet, and the more apparent use of synthesizers on this track really helps to kind of bring more color to that track. In fact, Ronson and the production team tend to bring in a lot of synthesizers onto this album, backing the guitars, which I actually don't mind. I guess if Queens wanted to be a little more poppier, then I think the singles released beforehand, leading up to the release of this album, showed that they could certainly pull it off if they consistently had punchy songwriting and the like. And to be honest, the songwriting is still pretty punchy, especially if you listen to a song like The Way You Used to Do, which has this incredibly dancey rhythm to it that just makes you want to get up and just kind of do a little bit of a shuffle to it, you know? If there is a problem with Villains that does hinder my full, undivided enjoyment of this album, it wouldn't be the songwriting or anything like that, it would actually be the production. Because while there are new aspects to the production on this album that I do like the synthesizers as I mentioned before, as well as the generally dancier rhythms on these songs, I do think that there are some things that it didn't do quite right, especially because the drums, they sound plastic, and I know that it's kind of hard to say, oh, the drums single-handedly can kill a track. Well, actually that would be kind of harsh. I wouldn't say it kills the track. It leaves these tracks feeling like they don't have the crunch, they don't have the rawness, they don't have the explosiveness that you might hope to get from a rock record. A lot of the tracks here do sound very clean and polished up. I think a lot of these songs could have benefited from just being a little less flat when it came to some of the sounds of the instruments, the timbres of the instruments. I would also say that the songs do sound very compressed. I don't want to say that Queens of the Stone Age have to stick to a certain style. That's kind of silly considering some of their best records are like not even that close to each other in terms of their mood. You have something quite cathartically epic as a Songs of the Deaf, or something that's so off the wall like a Rated R. Something as moody and pummeling yet so monstrous and dark like Clockwork. If this wanted to be the dancier and poppier and more carefree album, imagining like a dance party with a whole load of villains, then I think that would have been super cool. In fact, I can see the appeal within this record, but it's just technically, on a production level, things do sound a little flat. If you are kind of into Queens, as well as the fact that it's just genuinely a nice record to listen to, maybe not something that I'll be like dying to come back to in the future, still room for improvement, but whatever, 6 out of 10.